My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old. I live in a quiet part of Ohio, and my story starts a long time ago, on a night that felt like the end of the world. When I was 16, my father chose to believe the poisonous words my stepmother whispered in his ear, and he threw me out of his house with nothing but a cheap backpack and the clothes I was wearing. For years, I was nothing to him. A ghost. A mistake he'd erased. Then, 16 years later, he knocked on the door of the house I built for myself. He wasn't there to apologize. He was there to demand I give it all up for my half-sister. But things were different this time. I was different, and I was the one who would have the last word. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. My mother died when I was 10. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because we were supposed to have tacos for dinner, and she always let me grate the cheese. The day was sunny, the kind of bright, early fall day in Ohio that feels warm and crisp at the same time. Then the phone call came, and the sun went out. My world didn't just change, it shattered. My dad, Mark, he shattered too. For a while, it was just the two of us, rattling around in a house that was suddenly too big, too quiet. We were two broken pieces trying to fit together, but the edges were too sharp. He'd look at me and I could see the pain in his eyes because I looked just like her. He loved me. I knew he did. But my face was a constant reminder of what he'd lost. A year later, Linda came into our lives. She was a whirlwind of bright lipstick, loud floral perfumes, and a smile that never, ever reached her eyes. She had a daughter, Sophie, who was 2 years younger than me. Sophie was her little princess, a doll with blonde curls and a pout that could get her anything she wanted. In public, Linda was perfect. She'd put her arm around me at church picnics and call me her sweet bonus daughter. Neighbors would tell my dad how lucky he was to have found such a wonderful woman to help raise me. He would beam, soaking in their approval. He needed things to be okay again, and Linda was his shortcut to a normal-looking family. But behind our closed front door, the sweetness curdled. I wasn't a bonus daughter. I was a burden, an inconvenient leftover from his first life. Linda's love was a resource, and it was all reserved for Sophie. It started with small things. Sophie would get brand new, name-brand jeans for the start of the school year. I would be told that my old ones were perfectly fine, even if they were an inch too short at the ankles. Linda would take Sophie for weekly dance classes, ballet and tap, and I'd sit in the waiting room with a book because we can't afford lessons for both of you, Emily. Be reasonable. I started getting a part-time job when I was 14, bussing tables at a local diner just so I could buy my own school supplies. I remember the sting of walking into the store with my own crumpled dollar bills to buy notebooks and pens, while the week before, Linda had spent over $200 on a custom-designed backpack for Sophie because it matched her new coat. I tried to tell my dad. I'd wait until Linda was out of the house and I'd approach him while he was watching TV, my heart pounding in my chest. "Dad," I'd start, my voice small, "Linda said there wasn't enough money for the class field trip." He wouldn't even look away from the screen. "Well, money's tight, Em. You know that." "But she just bought Sophie those new boots. They were really expensive." He'd finally turned to me, his brow furrowed with annoyance. "Emily, don't start this. Linda does the best she can. Sophie needed those boots. Don't be jealous. It's not a good look on you." Jealous. That was her favorite word. Anytime I pointed out the unfairness, I was being jealous. Anytime I asked for something I needed, I was being ungrateful. Linda was a master at twisting things. She'd frame it as me being the difficult, moody teenager, and Sophie being the sweet, easy child. My dad, who just wanted a peaceful home, bought it every single time. He never questioned Linda's version of events. It was easier not to. I loved my dad so desperately. I craved his approval, his attention. I remembered the man he was before my mom died, the dad who would push me on the swings until I felt like I could touch the sky, the dad who taught me how to ride a bike and held on until I was steady. I kept looking for that man, but he was gone. In his place was a stranger who looked at me with tired, wary eyes, as if he was just waiting for me to cause the next problem. The house became a minefield. If I left a glass in the sink, Linda would sigh dramatically and tell my dad, "I just can't keep up with her mess. She has no respect for this home." If Sophie broke a plate, it was a simple accident. If I did, it was carelessness. Sophie learned from her mother. She knew she was untouchable. She would take my things from my room without asking, a book, a sweater, a necklace my mom had given me. When I'd confront her, she'd run to Linda crying that I was bullying her, and then I would be the one getting grounded. I was living in a funhouse of distorted mirrors where nothing I did was right and everything she did was perfect. I felt like I was slowly being erased from my own home, my own family. And the worst part was, my dad was holding the eraser. The night it all ended, I was 16. It was a cold, rainy Thursday in November. I'd just gotten home from my shift at the diner, my clothes smelling like grease and my feet aching. I remember putting my meager tips, about $30 in crumpled bills, into the little ceramic jar I kept on my dresser. It was my fund for a used car, a dream that felt a million miles away. I went downstairs to get a glass of water. The house was quiet. Dad was working late and Sophie was at a friend's house. Linda was in the living room, sitting on the couch with her purse open on the coffee table, sorting through receipts. She looked up when I walked in, and her eyes had a strange, sharp glint to them. "There you are," she said. Her voice was too calm. It set my teeth on edge. "Hi," I mumbled, heading toward the kitchen. "Wait a minute, Emily." I stopped, my hand on the kitchen doorframe. I turned around. "Something's missing," she said, looking from her open wallet to me. "I had a $100 bill in here for the caterer for the Thanksgiving party. Now it's gone." My blood ran cold. I knew immediately where this was going. "I didn't touch your purse, Linda." She let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Really? Because you were the only one home this afternoon after school. Sophie's been gone since 3. I was in my room doing homework until I left for work. I never came in here. I didn't take your money." "Oh, Emily. Oh, Emily." She shook her head, a look of profound disappointment on her face. It was an act, a brilliant one. She looked like a mother heartbroken by her child's betrayal. "Please, just tell me the truth. Give the money back, and we can try to move past this." "There is no money," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I didn't steal anything." Just then, the front door opened. My dad walked in, shaking the rain from his coat. He looked tired. He saw Linda dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and he saw me standing there, shouting. His face hardened instantly. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice heavy. Linda let out a sob, a perfect, gut-wrenching sob. "Oh, Mark, thank God you're home. I didn't know what to do." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She stole money from my purse, $100, and now she's lying about it." My dad's eyes swiveled to me. There was no question in them, no doubt, just a deep, weary accusation. "Emily?" "I didn't do it, Dad. I swear I didn't." My words were a desperate plea. I looked at him, trying to find the man who used to believe me, the man who used to be my protector. "She's lying. Why would I steal from her?" "Why?" Linda cut in, her voice thick with fake tears. "Because she's out of control, Mark. The lying, the sneaking around. I'm scared. She'll ruin this family. What's next? What if she does something to hurt Sophie?" That was the kill shot. The mention of Sophie, his new daughter, the perfect daughter. My dad's face, which had been a mask of anger, turned to stone. He didn't look at me. He looked at Linda and then at the floor. He took a deep breath. "Go to your room, Emily," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Pack a bag." The air left my lungs. "What? Dad, no, you can't believe her." "I said pack a bag," he roared, his voice echoing in the small entryway. I flinched back as if he'd slapped me. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and useless. I stumbled up the stairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. In my room, I moved in a daze. I pulled my backpack from the closet and started shoving things inside. A pair of jeans, a few t-shirts, my toothbrush. I grabbed the ceramic jar with my tip money, my pathetic little car fund, and dumped the contents into the bag. When I came back downstairs, my backpack slung over one shoulder, he was standing by the front door, holding it open. The cold, rainy night air rushed in. Linda was standing behind him, her arms crossed, a look of quiet triumph on her face. The tears were gone. "Dad, please," I whispered, one last time. "Don't do this." He wouldn't look at me. He just stared out into the darkness. "You're not welcome here anymore, Emily." His words were flat, final. He was a judge delivering a life sentence. I walked past him, out onto the porch, into the rain. I didn't have a coat. The door clicked shut behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I stood there for a full minute, the cold rain soaking my hair and my thin sweater, my heart not just broken, but shattered into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. He hadn't asked a single question. He hadn't looked for evidence. He had simply taken her word over mine. He had thrown me away. I was 16 years old, and I was homeless. I turned and walked down the driveway, into the darkness, with no idea where I was going. My life, as I knew it, was over. That first night, I slept on the couch of my friend Sarah. Her parents let me stay, their faces a mixture of pity and suspicion. I told them I'd had a big fight with my dad, leaving out the part about being accused of theft and thrown out like garbage. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I lay on that lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a happy family sleeping peacefully in their beds upstairs. Every creak of the house, every passing car was a reminder that I had no home to go back to. I cried until my eyes were raw and swollen, a silent, choking grief that felt like it would never end. The next day, I had to go to school. I tried to act normal, but I felt like I was wearing a sign that said discarded. Everyone I looked at seemed to have a safe, warm home to return to. I had a backpack with 3 shirts and $34.50. After a week, Sarah's parents started asking questions. "When is your father going to call, Emily? Have you talked to him?" Their kindness was fraying at the edges. I was a problem they hadn't signed up for. I knew I couldn't stay. I used the payphone at school during lunch. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial the number. He answered on the second ring. "Dad?" I said, my voice a broken whisper. There was a pause. "Emily." He sounded tired, annoyed. "Dad, can I please come home? I'm sorry. For whatever you think I did, I'm sorry. I want to come home." The words tumbled out, coded in desperation. I heard Linda's voice in the background, a sharp, indistinct murmur, and then my dad's voice came back on the line, colder than before. "That's not possible." "Why?" I begged. "I'll do anything. I'll pay the money back even though I didn't take it. Please." "It's not about the money anymore." And his next words were the ones that truly broke me. They were a knife that slid right into the deepest part of my heart and twisted. "It's not about the money anymore," he said. And his next words were the ones that truly broke me. They were a knife that slid right into the deepest part of my heart and twisted. "Linda doesn't feel safe with you around Sophie." That was it. It wasn't just that he didn't believe me, it was that he saw me as a threat to his new family, to his real family. I was the danger, the problem that had to be removed so that his perfect new life could continue undisturbed. I hung up the phone without another word. The hope that had been a tiny, flickering candle flame inside me was extinguished, plunged into icy water. That sentence, more than the act of locking the door, was my true eviction. He wasn't just kicking me out of his house, he was kicking me out of his heart. I moved on from Sarah's couch. I stayed with another friend for a few nights, then another. I was a nomad, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. Eventually, the couches ran out. At 17, I found a tiny windowless room to rent in a rundown house on the bad side of town. The rent was $200 a month, a fortune to me. I dropped out of the after-school clubs and picked up more shifts at the diner. My life became a cycle of school, work, and sleep in a room that always smelled of damp and loneliness. Some nights, I'd be so tired I'd fall asleep in my work uniform. I'd serve families at the diner, a dad, a mom, a couple of kids, all laughing and sharing fries. I'd have to turn my face away so they wouldn't see the tears in my eyes. I was starving, not just for food, but for the simple, ordinary love I was watching from the sidelines. I finished high school. I walked across the stage to get my diploma, and the small crowd of parents cheered for their children. I looked out, searching for a face that wasn't there, a pointless habit I couldn't seem to break. After the ceremony, I went back to my little room and ate a convenience store sandwich for dinner. That was my graduation party. Rock bottom wasn't one single moment. It was a long, grinding stretch of time. It was the winter I couldn't afford a proper coat and had to wear 3 sweaters to keep from freezing. It was the nights I lived on crackers and water because I had to choose between food and paying the rent. It was the crushing, overwhelming loneliness that was my constant companion. There were moments I almost gave up, moments I thought about just letting go, disappearing completely. The world felt so big and so cold, and I was so small and so alone. But then, a flicker of something else would ignite inside me. Anger. A hard, defiant anger. They had thrown me away, but I would not let them be right about me. I would not be the useless, out-of-control screw-up Linda had painted me as. I would not collapse. My survival would be my rebellion. That anger became my fuel. It pushed me to study for my SATs in the back booth at the diner during my break. It pushed me to apply for every scholarship I could find. It pushed me to work double shifts until my body ached, saving every single dollar I could. They had left me with nothing, so I would build something from scratch. I would build a life so solid, so stable, that no one could ever take it away from me again. The day the acceptance letter from Ohio State arrived, with a scholarship offer that would cover most of my tuition, I sat on the floor of my tiny room and cried. But these were different tears. They weren't tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of relief and a fierce, fragile hope. It was a lifeline, a way out. College was a different kind of survival. I was still working 40 hours a week, waiting tables, juggling classes, and studying until 2 in the morning. I lived in the cheapest off-campus housing I could find with 3 other roommates. There were no spring break trips to Florida for me, no weekends spent just hanging out. My life was a meticulously planned schedule of work and study. But for the first time since I was 10, I felt like I was building something. I was good at my classes. My professors saw me as a smart, capable student, not a problem to be managed. I made a few friends, people who didn't know my past, who only knew me as Emily, the girl who worked hard and always had her notes organized. It was a clean slate. After I graduated with a degree in business, I got a job at a small real estate firm in Columbus. I started at the bottom, making copies and answering the phones, but I watched everything. I learned the business inside and out. I worked longer hours than anyone else. I was patient, persistent, and I was good at it. Slowly, I started to climb. I got my real estate license, then my broker's license. I went from being an assistant to an agent, from an agent to a partner. All the while, I saved. Every commission check, every bonus, a huge portion of it went straight into a savings account. I lived frugally, driving a 10-year-old car and packing my own lunch. I never forgot the feeling of being cold and hungry. Financial security wasn't just a goal, it was an obsession. It was my armor. 10 years after I had walked out of my father's house with nothing, I stood on the sidewalk and looked at a house of my own. It wasn't huge or fancy. It was a modest 3-bedroom brick house in a quiet, leafy neighborhood. It had a big oak tree in the front yard and a small, neglected garden in the back. The day I closed on it, the feeling was indescribable. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I ran my hand along the cool surface of the kitchen counter. I stood in the backyard and imagined planting tulips and tomatoes. This wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary. It was a fortress. It was the physical manifestation of every double shift, every lonely night, every tear I had ever shed. It was proof that I had not only survived, but I had won. I had built a home for the girl who was thrown out into the rain. I spent the next few years making it mine. I painted the walls a warm, soft gray. I learned how to garden, and soon the backyard was filled with flowers. I filled the rooms with comfortable furniture I'd bought and paid for myself. I hosted Thanksgiving for my friends, the real family I had built for myself. My house was quiet, peaceful, and safe. It was everything I had ever wanted. I hadn't spoken to my father, or Linda, or Sophie in over a decade. They were ghosts from another life, a painful memory I kept locked away. I assumed I would never see them again. I was wrong. I was 32 years old, and my life was stable. I was a partner at my firm, I had a healthy savings account, and I had my beautiful, peaceful house. The past was a scar, but it had faded. It no longer ached with every breath. Then, one Tuesday evening, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but it had a local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? There was a pause, then a man's hesitant voice. Emily? Is that you? My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard that voice in 16 years, but I knew it instantly. It was my father. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. 1,000 emotions swirled inside me. Shock, anger, and a deep, buried pain that I thought had long since disappeared. Emily, it's Dad, he said as if I could have forgotten. Listen, I know it's been a long time. A long time. That was one way to put it. What do you want? I finally managed to say. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I heard you were doing well for yourself, he said, an awkward chuckle in his voice. Bought a house. That's great. Really great. Someone must have told him. A distant relative, an old neighbor. News travels in small towns. I'm busy, I said, preparing to hang up. Wait, Emily, please, he said, a new urgency in his tone. I'm calling for a reason. It's about Sophie. Of course it was. It was always about Sophie. She just got engaged, he continued, steamrolling ahead, to a nice young man. They're just starting out, you know how it is. They're looking for a house, but the market is just crazy right now. They can't afford anything. I stayed silent, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I knew where this was going. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Anyway, he said, clearing his throat, we were talking, and we thought of you. You've got that nice house, all to yourself. It's a family-size house, really. 3 bedrooms. You've got more than you need, Emily. There it was, the purpose of his call. After 16 years of silence, not an apology, not a question about how I was, it was a request. No, not a request. It was an assumption. And what are you suggesting? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Well, we thought maybe you could help, he said, the words tumbling out now that he'd gotten to the point. Help Sophie and her fiancé get on their feet. You could let them have the house. It would be an incredible gift, a way to, reconnect with the family. Let them have the house. The house I bled for. The house that represented every ounce of my pain and perseverance. He wanted me to just hand it over to the girl for whom I was thrown away. The bitter irony was so thick I could taste it. No, I said. It was a single, simple word. What? Emily, just think about it. It's for your sister. It's for family. She is not my sister, and you are not my family. Not anymore. The answer is no. Do not call me again. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I stood in my quiet kitchen, my hand shaking. The ghosts I had buried so long ago were back, and they weren't just rattling their chains. They were knocking on my door. 2 days later, they showed up. I was in my garden, pruning my rose bushes, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. I watched as Linda got out of the passenger side. She looked older, her face harder, but she wore the same overly bright lipstick I remembered. Then from the driver's side, Sophie emerged. She was no longer a teenager, but a young woman with the same entitled smirk I remembered so clearly. My heart started to pound a frantic, angry rhythm against my ribs. This was my home, my sanctuary, and they were trespassing. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees, and walked to the front porch just as they were about to ring the doorbell. Linda's practiced, sweet smile appeared when she saw me, but it faltered slightly when I didn't return it. "Emily!" she chirped, as if we'd just seen each other last week. "You look, well." "What are you doing here, Linda?" I asked, crossing my arms across my chest. I didn't invite them in. "Well, your father told us about your phone call," she said, her tone shifting to one of gentle reprimand. "Honestly, Emily, I was so disappointed to hear how rude you were. After all this time, is that any way to speak to your father?" Sophie shifted her weight, looking past me, sizing up the house with a critical eye. "It's bigger than I thought it would be," she commented to her mother, completely ignoring me. I stared at Linda, my mind reeling at her nerve. "You need to leave," I said, my voice low and steady. "Now, don't be like that," Linda said, stepping closer. She tried to put a hand on my arm, and I flinched away. "We just want to talk. Your father is very upset. He thought you'd be happy to help the family." "Help the family?" I repeated the words, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "The family that threw me out in the middle of the night?" Linda's smile vanished completely. Her face hardened into the cruel mask I remembered from my childhood. "You deserved it," she hissed. "You were a troubled child. You were tearing our family apart with your jealousy and your lies." "We did what we had to do." Sophie finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a familiar disdain. "Mom's right. You are always so dramatic, crying about everything." She gestured vaguely at my house. "Dad said you'd see reason. My fiancé Kevin and I really need a place like this. The yard would be great for a dog." She was already mentally redecorating. She was standing on my porch, planning out her life in my home, a home that she had no right to, a home she thought was owed to her. "It's only fair, Emily," Linda continued, her voice rising. "You've had enough chances. You landed on your feet. Good for you. But Sophie deserves stability. She deserves a good start in her marriage. Your father thinks you owe this family after all the trouble you caused." I just stood there, frozen, not in fear, but in disbelief. The sheer, unmitigated gall of their demand. They believed this. They truly believed that after abandoning me, After causing me years of pain and struggle, I owed them something. That my success was a resource they were entitled to plunder, that my home, the symbol of my victory over the life they had condemned me to, should be given to the very person who had benefited from my exile. Sophie smirked, looking at the bedroom window on the second floor. "That front room gets good morning light," she said to herself, as if to herself. "That can be my office." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The old, scared, 16-year-old girl who would have cried and crumbled under their attack was gone. In her place was a 32-year-old woman who had built a fortress, not just of brick and mortar, but of will and fire. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just turned around. "Wait here," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. I walked back inside my house, leaving them standing on my porch. The air inside was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the toxic storm brewing outside. I went to my office, a small room at the back of the house that looked out over my garden. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick navy blue folder. My hand was steady, my heart was calm. I knew exactly what I was doing. Inside the folder was every document related to my house: the original purchase agreement, the deed, with my name and my name alone listed as the owner, the mortgage statements showing the years of consistent on-time payments, the final statement stamped in big red letters, paid in full, every tax record, every insurance payment. It was the complete financial story of my home, a story written in numbers and signatures, a story of my labor and my sacrifice. I walked back to the front door, the folder in my hand. Linda and Sophie were still on the porch, whispering to each other. They looked up expectantly when I opened the door, as if they thought I had gone inside to pack my bags for them. I didn't say a word. I simply stepped out onto the porch, opened the folder, and placed it on the small wicker table between the chairs. Linda peered at the documents, a frown creasing her forehead. "What is this?" "That," I said, my voice clear and even, "is the deed to my house. That is the proof of ownership, and that is the final mortgage statement showing a balance of 0. I let them look. I watched the confusion on Linda's face turn to disbelief. I watched Sophie's smug expression slowly dissolve as she realized what she was seeing. "This house is mine," I said, meeting Linda's gaze directly. "I bought it with my money, the money I earned from the jobs I worked while I was putting myself through school, the money I earned at the firm where I have worked for the last 10 years. There was no trust fund, there was no inheritance, there was no help from you or from my father." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Their silence was deafening. Then I looked straight at Linda and I delivered the final blow. It wasn't shouted. It was spoken quietly, a simple statement of fact, but it carried the weight of 16 years of pain. When I was a child and I needed a home, you threw me out. You stood and watched as my father locked the door behind me, and you did nothing. I shifted my gaze to Sophie, who now refused to look at me. You wanted my room then, and you got it. Now you want my house. I looked back at Linda. You are standing on my property, demanding that I give away the one thing that represents every bit of safety and security that you and my father denied me. You're asking me to give my home away. I took a deep breath. Never again. I calmly collected the papers, slid them back into the folder, and tucked it under my arm. Then I walked to my front door and held it open. "Get out of my house," I said. The words were not a request. They were a command. Linda's face was a mottled mess of red and white, a mixture of fury and humiliation. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she had been rendered speechless. Sophie just stared at the ground, her face pale. They stumbled off the porch like chastised children, got into their car, and drove away without a single backward glance. I stepped back inside and locked the door behind them. I leaned against it, the cool wood a comfort at my back. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, quiet, and final sense of peace. The war was over, and I had won. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. The silence that followed their departure was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter of my life finally, irrevocably closing. In that quiet moment, leaning against my front door, I realized that true strength wasn't about shouting them down or seeking revenge. It was about the calm, unshakable power to say no and to lock the door on the people who had hurt you. I didn't hear from them for a few days. I half expected my father to call, to scream at me, to accuse me of disrespecting Linda, but the phone remained silent. I think, for the first time, they had no script to follow. They had always held all the power, and they didn't know how to react now that the tables had turned. I chose not to press charges for harassment or trespassing, though I probably could have. It wasn't worth the energy. Instead, I took a simpler, more permanent step. I went into my phone's contacts list. I found my father's number, which I had saved out of some long-dead sense of obligation. I looked at it for a moment. Then I pressed block. I did the same for the number Linda had called from. It was a small digital action, but it felt monumental. It was a boundary, clear and absolute. I was done. Years passed. I heard snippets of news through the grapevine of distant family I still occasionally spoke to. Sophie's marriage didn't last. Apparently, her fiancé wasn't prepared for a life with someone who expected everything to be handed to her. They struggled with money, argued constantly, and eventually divorced. My father never got the house he demanded for her. They ended up living in a cramped apartment, a life far from the one they had envisioned taking from me. I never felt happy about their misfortune, but I didn't feel sad either. I just felt detached. Their lives were their own, a story that no longer had anything to do with mine. My life, on the other hand, flourished. My house remained my sanctuary. My garden grew more beautiful with each passing year. My circle of friends, my real family, the family I had chosen, grew stronger. We celebrated birthdays and holidays together. We supported each other through hardships and cheered each other's successes. I found a love that was kind and patient, with a man who knew my story and saw my scars not as damage, but as proof of my strength. I lived peacefully. The ghost of that 16-year-old girl, cold and alone in the rain, no longer haunted me. I had given her a safe, warm home, and she was finally at rest. My father and Linda had tried to write my story for me, to cast me as the villain, the failure. But I had taken the pen back and written my own ending. Have you ever been cast out only for the same people to crawl back when they needed you? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories of betrayal, survival, and poetic justice. Because sometimes silence is the loudest revenge.